Hallowed Fountain tapped. No damage to Tim as of yet. Paul draws a good one. He draws Swift Spear for the turn. That's going to enable him to put a clock on Tim right away and kind of get in under counter magic, which is kind of the bane of this deck's existence. You can get an opponent to a low life total with this deck quite easily, but it can sometimes stumble across the finish line if it even makes it there. So Tim has Bolt, Geist, and lands, which is really, really bad for this matchup. The Geist is a really poor blocker. Often gets traded with at best. Oh, Paul's going to fetch a mountain. So he's going to go to 19. He played against Jeskai Control on Wednesday and was very aggressive in how he shocked himself and then died to burn both games. So it's possible he's adjusting his game plan a bit. I will say that it's a little early to be doing that, but depending on the texture of his hand, it might not be the worst idea in the world. So Tim and Paul both at 19. Tim's going to play a Misty Rainforest, which is a weird one for Jeskai Control. Usually you just want the Tarns and Flooded Strands and call it a day. Misty's almost always going to be a shock at that point, or just a blue source, and oftentimes you'd rather have a Sulfur Falls in that spot. So interesting decision Tim's made in deck building there. We'll see if that actually plays into it. The fetch isn't free all the time. If that was like a Sulfur Falls or something, he'd be in a lot better shape. And if he does want to bolt this Swift Spear, he's going to have to take damage. Paul's going to fetch at least to 18. See if it's any lower. He's been conservative with his life total in the first turn, which is usually when you don't want to be. So it looks like, yeah, he's going to go ahead and shock himself down to 16. Of note, he doesn't have any Death Shadows in hand currently. So it is worth seeing how he balances his life total versus how he fetches his lands. The thing is that he's going to want the mana early, and if he waits too late to get the mana in play and efficient, then it doesn't really matter because he's going to be dead because he didn't do anything. Tim's going to read Monastery Swift Spear. Yeah, Sianu, this deck is a brew. It is definitely a brew. I think it popped up online, which is where Paul might have found it. I'm going to fetch in response. It's modern, you know? As long as you're doing something broken at some point, you can play your deck, even if it's not as consistent as all the other ones or what have you. Tim's going to have to shock himself down to 16. I think he's going to bolt the Swift Spear in response with the Prowess trigger on the stack so that Paul can't respond after with a burn spell. Like if Tim tries to get this Swift Spear in combat, it's a heads up play. Okay, so this isn't going to work, I think, the way Paul wants it to, unless Tim let the Prowess trigger resolve, which it looks like he might have. Tim just let the Prowess trigger resolve? Martin, is that what happened? Because it looked like that Lava Spike was on the stack, and he bolted in response, which means the Prowess trigger wouldn't have resolved unless he let it. Because Prowess uses the stack. Looks like we're going to sort out what happened there. It depends on the way Tim worded what he was doing. If that Lava Spike... Well, I don't know how this happens anyway other than a Swift Spear dying. Tim would have had to yeah, there we go. Swift Spear is definitely dead. I was going to say, there would have to be some weird use of the stack there. on Tim's side, not even Paul's, to have that happen. So glad we caught that, because that's a big deal. Tim's at 10, not 7, with a Swift Spear on board still. I mean, there's a reason he fetched that land and lightning bolted the Swift Spear. Like, you don't do that for no reason. Sianu, yeah, Death Shadow is a good card. Death Shadow is very good. Big fan myself. Ryan is currently battling this FNM with my Grixis Shadow deck. Card is good. Alright, so Tim's just going to play basic planes, tap out for Geist of Saint Traft. He's vulnerable, but because there's no board, he definitely has the ability to start pressuring Paul, which he'll need to do. Unfortunately for him, Paul's going to be able to just slam a Gurmag Angler. And I think Tim doesn't have an answer as of yet, although he might have picked up one over the past couple turns. His deck definitely has answers. Electrolyze is a good one. Even if he has a Bolt and you just swing the Geist in, it might be worth the trade. Gurmag Angler sticks. There's not going to be anything from Tim. This isn't Legacy. Paul leaves basic Mountain up. Interesting, because he has a Shock and then no play with the Mountain. He could have played that tapped if he wanted to. It's not even really much value in bluffing a Bolt here, because you can't bolt the Geist. Can't bolt Geist, so there's not really a ton of reason to bluff a Bolt here, which is the only thing you're bluffing, unless Tim thinks he plays, I don't know, Burst Lightning or something. Seems also unlikely. Tim's gonna attack, and this is what I was saying. I think he has a Bolt in hand. So he's all right if the Gurmag Angler blocks. Now my question is if Tim has something on the defensive, because this clock actually doesn't kill Paul fast enough unless Tim has 6. Lightning Bolt doesn't do it. He would need Bolt and something else. Paul just finds another land though, so it's just going to be this Gurmag Angler having to go the distance. Oh, sorry, Paul is also at 10 now. Geist is a quick clock. Paul's deck's ill-suited to playing lands untapped. Trust me, Adam, I know. I know. They really don't match. And the problem is he draws so many of them that I always notice. Looks like this is Snapcaster Bolt, which is pretty much a disaster for Paul. This is... I wonder what Tim's hand is, because Snapcaster Bolt is lethal. Like, if he doesn't block the Gurmag Angler and just kind of like waits to see what Paul does. I mean, there's a lot of ways that goes wrong. So this is definitely a safer play, and I would probably make it myself. But if he thought that Paul was on nothing, then... then he could just set up the lethal. But, I mean, Geist on its own is just going to get the job done here. Tim's at a very healthy life total. Another 6 to Paul. I mean, that makes his Death Shadows bigger, but doesn't matter because the Angel will kill him next turn on the attack, even if the Geist gets blocked. And all he has is a Gurmag. He can fetch, but then he's dead to a Bolt. I probably think you sandbag that Bolt, since if your opponent fetches, they die. Unless he just has a Snapcaster Mage, in which case, yeah, absolutely go for it. Makes sense to me. So, Paul's at 1. Tim goes down to 9. Gets a Mountain, which I assume means he does have the third Bolt in hand. That is technically the third Bolt. And Paul's going to crack a fetch to kill himself. So, 1 game to Tim. Jeskai control winning what is definitely a favorable matchup for that deck. Even on a mulligan to 6, I think his deck's favored if he finds removal spells, especially because Paul's not like a devoted Death Shadow deck. He doesn't find it well because he cut blue. And the threats he replaced, the threats he used instead of cantrips and blue are all dead to like bolts. They're easy to kill for the Jeskai deck. So you trade out a lot of your redundancy and consistency for like a faster clock, but that clock's more easily answered by Jeskai control. So I think you end up making this match worse as red-black Shadow than you would be with Grixis, even though you have more consistent mana. The thing about Grixis is it's not ever really struggled with his mana. The cost of playing 3 colors in Modern is not so much that you usually don't find your colors, it's that it costs a lot of life to play. Grixis Shadow doesn't care about that for a while, at least, and so you never really struggle to find your colors in that deck. So, I mean, Paul definitely didn't make the choice to build red-black Kiln Shadow, thinking that the smoother mana base was a big draw to it, because that's just not going to be the case. In fact, he actually loses out on some of his Death Shadow value because he has so few shocks he can play. He can only play 4 Blood Crypts. Traditionally, Death Shadow decks play about 5 shocks. Usually, say it's Grixis, it'd be 2 Watery Grave, 2 Blood Crypt, 1 Steam Vents. So you actually lose 1, which can matter. I just don't know how much value you get out of building your deck with like an extra, Monastery Spears and Kiln Fiends when the format has skewed to either the control decks have answers to 1 and 2 drops that have high toughness or high power, like Fatal Push, or they have a game plan that outraces you or does something more unfair. Seems like an awkward time to be playing Kiln Fiend, even though the card is cool. And I do like a Kiln Fiend. See, like, Paul's going to be on the play, which will definitely help. That's kind of where you want to be with a Swift Spear type deck. This deck plays way more like Burn than it does like a Death Shadow deck. And Paul just can't quit Kiln Fiend. I don't think he'll ever stop playing that card at this point. Every deck he builds plays that card. Bring it up on screen because a lot of modern players might not be familiar with it. It's not exactly the most popular card. That is the Kiln Fiend. Basically, if this is attacking, every spell you play is a Lightning Bolt on top of it, if it's attacking and not blocked. So it's a very powerful effect. It's very good with Temur Battle Rage. What is the split card? Is that Claim to Fame? It's an interesting one. So the issue with Claim to Fame in the Death Shadow decks people thought it would be good in is that those decks run Delve cards, and there can be an awkward tension with that effect, even if you're running Thought Scours and Fetches and whatnot. Paul doesn't have a lot of great ways to put cards in his graveyard outside of them getting killed by the opponent, so it's interesting that he has the claim here. And a lot of his cards are lower power level claim targets. Like Monastery Spear is not an amazing claim target. It already has haste, so even the flashback part of it isn't as good, although it definitely boosts it by a fair margin. I assume the goal is to claim a Kiln Fiend, give it haste, and then it's attacking for 6 minimum. And Paul's gonna fetch shock himself down to 17. Pass the turn after a bump in the night, so both players at 17. Yeah, that's another one Paul's playing. Forgot to mention that one. He plays Bump in the Night. And believe it or not, I've seen him draw so many lands every time he's on camera that he has come close to flashing them back. He just dies before he gets the chance. And his opponents wouldn't be dead even if he did. It's awkward, you know. It could definitely be a better card. He's testing it, I imagine. Just trying to see if it's got legs in Modern still. It's going to shock in a Blood Crypt and pass. That's interesting. Tim's going to fetch. I imagine he's going to get a land tapped because there's no threat to deal with on the battlefield, and he's going to want to preserve his life total. Looking at the texture of his hand, I think he has a Sacred Foundry in hand, so it's likely he finds Steam Vents or Hallowed Fountain. My guess is since he's passing over to Steam Vents, it's going to be a Hallowed Fountain. Yeah, you definitely don't want to pass up the chance to get a shock, especially a tapped shock in a matchup where your life total's under siege. If you can squeak out that edge, that can be the difference, especially without taking a hit from it, which Tim's going to be able to do because Paul just doesn't have a threat. This is an awkward start for Paul. I'm going to be interested to see what his keep actually was, see how his hand plays out. Not having a threat is really difficult on the first 2 turns. I mean, Bump of the Night is just a 3-point burn spell, and then if your turn 2 is just pass here, like if Tim just plays a land and says go and Paul untaps and draws, that's really bad for him. I don't see him winning a game where that happens, unless he has some sweet sideboard card I'm not ready for. Blow my mind. See, that's what I was talking about game 1, is that Sulphur Falls is such a good land for this deck. It's curious that Tim's playing what I imagine is the 9th fetch in Misty Rainforest over just another copy of Sulphur Falls. So it looks like Paul has a Death Shadow, a Gurmag Angler, an Apostle's Blessing, a Claim to Fame, and then 2 lands. So this hand really is not coming together. None of these cards are good right now. He doesn't have a fetch land to even threaten to enable a Gurmag next turn. He falls to 13 when he shocks himself in with the Blood Crypt, but that's not going to really matter because he can't play a Death Shadow still and doesn't have a way to deal himself damage. This was an awkward keep. I think this hand was probably a mulligan from Paul. This hand just doesn't actually do anything. Well, Tim's going to help Paul out a bit. Drop him to 10, go to 19. That's usually a bad play against this deck, but I think Tim feels comfortable, having not been presented with a threat yet, that he's going to be able to make this play. Probably have counter magic or removal spell to cover up anything that might slip through, and then just kind of go on the Snapcaster Mage burn plan to close this game out. That's fair. Also, Tim's never seen a Shadow in this matchup. Yeah, he might not know that his opponent's on Shadow, although if your opponent's aggressively shocking themselves and then not doing anything, like Paul did on turn 2, you have to imagine Tim's made that read by now. Paul's going to play a fetch. I mean, he can fetch and try and stick a Gurmag Angler. That doesn't seem great. He's going to try and stick a Death Shadow. Looks like it's going to resolve. Yeah, I think Tim had a Spell Queller in hand, so it's interesting he went with this line. Paul is almost assuredly going to fire off the Apostle's Blessing he has in hand here. He can't possibly let this get exiled because it makes his claim worse too. He's kind of hoping that Tim might be forced to tap out Supreme Verdict to answer it, something like that, and then the Claim to Fame will get value. You just can't let this get exiled because it just doesn't have anything going. So that's going to resolve. It's going to protect the Shadow. It's going to drop Paul to 8, so it's going to grow Shadow as well. Tim at a really healthy 19, though. The Shadow's going to have to go the distance. And against a deck like Jeskai Control with a lot more answers to creatures that are big, Path to Exile is an answer, Cryptic Command bouncing it or tapping it down is an answer temporarily. it's going to be difficult to really punch through the damage. Beyond that, I mean, there's even the threat that a Celestial Colonnade can outrace you if your threats aren't getting there fast enough. If Tim's able to just kind of slow the game down and hang in it, a Celestial Colonnade alone could be the threat that ends a Death Shadow deck's path to victory. He's debating. He's going to shock in the Steam Vents. He was going to play it in tapped, but he changed his mind. He does have Cryptic Command in hand, so that seems like a good idea. And he's at 19, so shocking it in and then not using all your mana isn't the end of the world anyway. Paul's going to fetch. I assume he doesn't shock himself, but maybe he does. He's thinking about it. You're already at this low life total. I don't think you want to go to 5. You shave off a burn spell that Tim needs. Doesn't seem like it's a good idea. He's going to go to 7 either way, so we'll adjust his life total there. But I think he just wants a basic here. Yeah. It's not like he's going to have any difficulty casting his spells. The Death Shadow is big enough in the sense that it's already a sizable threat. And this way, Tim's going to need 3 burn spells still. Paul's trying to figure out a way he wins this game, I think. It's unfortunate because I don't think there is one. He's fallen way too far behind against a very powerful deck. I also don't really like tapping yourself out of red to play a Gurmag Angler. I mean, there's no cost to holding up the red source here. I think he's saying he's countering the Gurmag Angler and bouncing Death Shadow. That doesn't seem right. Alright. Tim really doesn't want to take... I mean, I don't think there's a way he dies with just black up. I feel like you need to draw if he doesn't have an answer to Shadow, which it seems like he doesn't. I mean, he had a Geist in hand too. Like, I feel like he was close to being able to pull the trigger on just playing Geist, but I suppose you're dead to like mutagenic growth plus Temur Battle Rage at that point, like if you don't block. And since you're so far ahead, there's not a ton of harm in playing around like the worst case scenario. But when your opponent taps out for the Gurmag, countering and drawing seems fine. Don't think you can die. If he had 3 mutagenic growths, that's like worst case scenario because I don't think there's a black pump spell in Paul's deck. This will fizzle command, right? Or no? Looks like no. My Ruling's knowledge is not amazing, so at least in small interactions like that. Because I know if you like kill what Cryptic's trying to bounce in response, you'd fizzle it. Martin, how does Cryptic Command work? Okay. That makes sense. Just asking our judge so that I can learn, and you can learn with me, because I should really know how this interaction works, having played Cryptic Command many times in my life. So as long as it has 2 targets in this instance, as long as one of the targets is still there, it will resolve as much as it can. So in the instances where it's like, tap your team and then bounce a creature, if you remove the creature or it doesn't have that target anymore, you fizzle it because there's no targets anymore. Gotcha. That's the interaction I've always had come up. Is with the desperation cryptic commands, where you have to decide whether trying to bounce a permanent's right, and then if you accidentally miss or they remove the permanent, you just die. Paul's gonna fetch, or fetch from the flashback path. I mean, he's not winning this game. There's not much he can do here now. He's at 5. His opponent's presenting like what is actually a 1 or 2 turn clock. He drew a claim, which doesn't do anything. Or he drew a land and has a claim in hand, which doesn't do anything, which is a rough beat. Claim has a lot of targets in this deck, but Gurmag Anglers are not one of them, and that's the only thing in Paul's graveyard. Snap's gonna connect. Paul dead to basically everything, except maybe an Electrolyze. Electrolyze probably is gonna kill him anyway, so Tim just kind of has to decide how he's gonna end this game. I think there's no harm in sticking a Geist here if he doesn't have the kill. He's thinking about it, thinking about it. Yeah, you probably play the Snapcaster. It seems like a good card. Probably target Lightning Helix too. Yeah, that'll do it. Quick 2-0 for our Jeskai control player.